The sound of scraping metal cut through the quiet parking lot like a scream, and in that single breathless second, Jacob Miller felt his entire life tilt toward ruin. His rusted pickup jolted as it brushed against the sleek black sedan beside it, a car so pristine it looked out of place among the cracked pavement and flickering lights of a grocery store on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Jacob's hands froze on the steering wheel, his chest tightening as the weight of another mistake pressed down on a man who already carried too many. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe second chances can change lives, and if you believe even the smallest good act can echo further than we imagine. Jacob sat there longer than he should have, engine idling, heart racing. He was a single father to an 8-year-old boy named Noah, a widower whose world had narrowed to school drop-offs, late shifts, and stretching every dollar until it almost tore. The damage to the other car was small, a thin scratch curving like a cruel smile across the door, but Jacob knew even a small repair could cost more than he earned in weeks. He didn't have insurance that would cover it, and he didn't have the luxury of driving away without consequences. His mind flickered with the temptation to leave, to pretend it never happened, to survive another day by looking the other way. But survival had already cost him his pride, and he refused to let it take his integrity too. He stepped out into the cold, the parking lot lights buzzing overhead, and inspected the damage with shaking fingers. His own truck bore the scars of years of neglect, peeling paint and dents earned from life's steady blows, but the other car told a different story. It was expensive, polished, and clearly owned by someone who lived in a world far removed from Jacob's. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded receipt, the only scrap of paper he had, and borrowed a pen from the glove compartment. Standing there in the chill, he wrote a note explaining what had happened, apologizing with a sincerity that felt almost painful, and leaving his name and phone number, knowing full well he might never be able to afford whatever came next. He tucked the note carefully under the windshield wiper, smoothing it as if that small gesture could somehow soften the blow. What Jacob never noticed was the man watching from across the lot. Charles Whitman stood near the store entrance, keys in hand, having just finished a late-night meeting call. He was the CEO of a nationwide logistics company, a man whose name appeared in business magazines and whose decisions moved millions of dollars with a signature. He had come out for milk and bread, craving a moment of normalcy after another long day, and now he paused, drawn by the sight of a tired man lingering beside his car with an expression that looked like shame mixed with resolve. Charles had seen enough of the world to recognize that look, and something about it made him stay still. Jacob drove away eventually, his shoulders hunched, his mind racing with worries about how he would explain this to Noah if it came to that. He returned to their small apartment, reheated leftovers, and helped his son with homework, all while the image of that scratch haunted him. Noah talked about school, about a science project, about dreams that still came easily to a child who believed his father could fix anything. Jacob listened and smiled, hiding the fear that crept into his chest when the phone buzzed later that night with an unknown number he couldn't bring himself to answer. The next morning brought no relief. Jacob went to his job at a warehouse, lifting boxes until his back ached, his thoughts spiraling through worst-case scenarios. He imagined angry calls, legal threats, demands he could never meet. When his break came, he finally listened to the voicemail. The message was calm, measured, and unexpected. The man introduced himself as Charles, said he had found the note, and asked Jacob to call back. There was no anger in the voice, only curiosity. Jacob's hands trembled as he returned the call during lunch, his heart pounding as if he were stepping into a courtroom. What unfolded over the next few days shifted the ground beneath Jacob's feet. Charles asked about him, about why he had left the note, about his life. Jacob answered honestly, explaining his situation without embellishment or excuses. He spoke about Noah, about losing his wife, about trying to raise a good kid in a world that didn't make it easy. Charles listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush, and when the call ended, Jacob felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It felt like being seen. The meeting they arranged took place not in an office, but in a modest cafe near the parking lot where it had all begun. Jacob arrived early, wearing his cleanest shirt, feeling out of place. Charles arrived without fanfare, just another man with tired eyes and a thoughtful expression. They talked about work, about responsibility, about the quiet choices people make when no one is watching. Charles admitted he had stayed to watch because he rarely saw honesty displayed so plainly, especially when it came at a personal cost. He told Jacob the scratch would be fixed, not as a favor, but as a reminder that integrity mattered more than money. But the story didn't end there. Charles asked Jacob about his job, about his skills, about what he wanted for his son. Jacob spoke of stability, of dignity, of wanting to be present without constantly choosing between rent and groceries. Charles listened again, and in that listening something shifted. A week later, Jacob received an offer he never expected, a chance to train for a supervisory role at one of Charles's facilities, a position that paid enough to breathe again. It wasn't charity, it was opportunity, built on trust. The days that followed were a blur of learning curves and quiet victories. Jacob worked harder than he ever had, driven not just by gratitude but by a renewed sense of self-worth. He came home less exhausted, more present. Noah noticed the change before anyone else did, the way his father laughed more easily, the way the apartment felt warmer even though nothing had physically changed. For the first time since his wife's passing, Jacob allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't defined solely by survival. Charles watched from a distance as Jacob grew into the role, never interfering, never boasting about his decision. For him, the lesson had been personal. He had built an empire by measuring outcomes, profits, and efficiency, but that night in the parking lot had reminded him of something he'd nearly forgotten. Character revealed itself in moments no spreadsheet could capture. The note on the windshield had been worth more than any quarterly report. Years later, that scratch was long gone, polished away, but its impact remained. Jacob eventually moved into a small house with a yard where Noah could play, a place filled with light and laughter, and the kind of peace that comes from earned stability. He never forgot the night that could have broken him, or the choice he made when it mattered. He told Noah the story not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson about doing the right thing even when it hurts. As this story draws close, if it stirred something in you, if it reminded you that honesty still has power and kindness still counts, take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive, reaching people who might need hope more than they realize. And just before we end, please comment what this story made you feel, because your words might be the encouragement someone else is quietly waiting for. Jacob never set out to change anyone's life that night. He only wanted to do the right thing. Yet in choosing integrity over fear, he altered the course of his own future and reminded a powerful man of the value of decency. In a cracked parking lot under flickering lights, two lives intersected not through wealth or status, but through a simple note left behind by a poor single dad who believed that being honest still mattered. And sometimes, that belief is enough to rewrite a destiny.